The moment I stepped into the meeting room that morning, the sunlight had not yet reached the tall windows behind the CEO. The white overhead lights cast a stark glow on every tense expression around the table. I had never imagined that a quarterly strategy meeting would become the turning point of my entire 17-year career. My name is Jennifer Aniston, Brand Strategy Director at Veritas and Co, a media company once known as the soul behind some of the most emotionally resonant marketing campaigns of the decade. For me, this was never just a job. It was part of my being, a place where I had proven my true worth for nearly 2 decades. Veritas used to be a small startup when I joined at 34. Back then, the office was a rented attic floor. The air conditioner rattled loudly, and everything ran more on boldness and passion than on process. I still remember the first campaign I led. It was for a small domestic dairy brand with a tiny budget, but we turned it into a talking point across billboards. I learned how to look into the eyes of consumers, to listen to their fears, their hopes, their beliefs. That, to me, was emotional marketing. Not data-driven, but human. Slowly, we grew, step by step building long-term relationships with major brands, and my name became associated with strategies that reshaped entire categories. But things began to shift after the company merged with a global media conglomerate. The new CEO was a young man named Lucas Grant, energetic, assertive, with a way of speaking that made entire rooms go silent. He brought with him a team of international experts, including Ava Sinclair, a British creative director with a portfolio that included major global brands. I tried to keep an open mind, though I was cautious at first. I thought perhaps this could be a new chapter, a chance to merge my experience with the fresh perspective they were bringing in. For the first 3 months, Ava and I worked quite well together. I gave her the space to create while I focused on keeping the brand aligned with its original identity. Together, we prepared a pitch for the biggest cosmetics brand in the market. It was the most important project of the quarter, a multi-million-dollar campaign that would be Veritas's gateway into East Asia. I spent weeks analyzing consumer behavior, writing positioning strategy, mapping out emotional narratives that could connect with the modern woman. Ava added bold visuals and cinematic short films with rich visual storytelling. We had created something I was truly proud of. And yet, during the final presentation, I was asked to sit at the back. I was not invited to speak. I was not allowed to present. Ava stood on stage in my place. Lucas introduced her as the mind behind the new concept. I was mentioned only as an internal consultant for the regional market. The way they looked at me, it was as if I had become a faded background in the very picture I helped paint. I tried to stay composed, but inside, the sting was too raw to hide. After the meeting, I asked Lucas about the sudden shift. He simply smiled and said it was part of the new strategy, that clients wanted fresh faces, that someone too anchored in the past might hold a brand back from innovation. I listened as my heart went hollow. Not because I wanted the spotlight, but because everything I had built was dismissed in a few cold sentences. In the weeks that followed, I was slowly removed from key meetings. Ava, meanwhile, was celebrated across internal communications as the one who revitalized Veritas. People I had once mentored began aligning themselves with the new leadership. I did not blame them. In a system where loyalty is traded for opportunity, people easily forget who laid the foundation. But the pain stayed, quiet, persistent. The moment that truly broke me was an email I received late one evening. In it, Lucas announced that the company was streamlining operations and that my role would be gradually transitioned to Ava, who would now oversee strategic brand direction. I was encouraged to consider voluntary resignation for the sake of dignity. I sat for hours at my desk, coffee cold beside me. It was not the title I mourned. It was everything I once believed in. Fairness, long-term trust in the workplace, the idea that integrity would protect you, all of it, gone in an instant. That night, I returned to the small apartment I had kept throughout my 20-year career. Every corner held traces of my past, the sleepless nights spent writing proposals, urgent client calls, victories that moved me to tears. I called my mother, who always saw me as the model of a successful woman, but when she heard my trembling voice, the first thing she asked was, "Did you do something wrong?" I could not answer, because I no longer knew. Maybe my mistake was believing that loyalty and talent were enough to keep me in a place I once called home. The next day, I packed my things. No one offered to help. No one asked why. No glances of regret. Only the weight of silence as I walked through the main doors. In my bag was a small USB drive where I kept all the original plans for the cosmetics campaign, documents that proved I had built the foundation, but I did not take it for revenge. Not then. I just wanted something to remind me that I had existed, that I had given something, that I had once believed. That night, I did not turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, holding that USB tightly as if gripping a piece of a life that had just been severed. I did not know what I would do next. But one thing had never been clearer. No one else gets to define my true worth. Only I do. At first, it was emptiness. In the early days after leaving the company, I woke up without an alarm, without meetings to rush to or emails demanding urgent replies. My daily routine suddenly felt unfamiliar. I would sit by the window for hours, watching the crowds below hurrying off to work. It felt like I had just stepped off a high-speed train, leaving behind everything I once thought belonged to me. But the stillness began to wake me up. One day, while reorganizing my bookshelf, I came across an old folder, its cover faded with time. It was the first proposal I had ever written for Veritas. The language was clumsy, the design rough, but every line revealed something I had slowly lost over the years, the spirit of starting out. I remembered what it felt like in the beginning, before the titles, before the personal brand. Just a simple belief that if I could understand people deeply enough, I could create campaigns that moved them, that earned their trust, and brought them back. That night, I opened the USB I had clutched in the dark. It held the original plans, personal notes, and even documents that had been altered without attribution. I had no intention of making any of it public or filing a lawsuit. I just needed to look at myself again before I had been pushed aside. As I read through each slide, each insight about women's behavior as consumers, one thing became clear. I was still there. My way of thinking, my sensitivity to emotion, my ability to read markets and shape strategy, all remained intact. Only my sense of trust had been worn thin, and I needed to rebuild it from scratch. I began with something very small. I created a personal blog, no name, no branding, just a quiet space to write down what I had learned from past campaigns. I shared the failures I used to hide, the lessons behind projects that had appeared flawless on the surface. I wrote about emotional marketing, but without slogans. I described the process of connecting with different groups, a single mother, a college student from a small town, and what made them believe in a brand. No one knew the blog was mine. I used no real name, no credentials. But after just 3 posts, I received a short email from a stranger, a cafe owner trying to rebuild their brand after the pandemic. I read your piece about the quiet fears of customers, and I saw myself in it. If possible, would you help me revisit my brand? I did not reply right away. I thought about it carefully, not because of money, but because I feared I no longer had the strength to start over from zero. But eventually, I said yes. It was the first time I had worked alone in years. No team, no assistant, no polished meeting room, just a small cafe with worn wooden tables and a handwritten menu. I sat there quietly for hours, observing, talking to returning customers, listening to what they remembered and what they missed. After 3 weeks, I delivered a rebranding plan, simple, unpolished, but it touched the very reason people had once loved the place. When the campaign launched, customer return rates rose by more than 40%, but what mattered more was the look in the owner's eyes. "I don't know who you are," she said, "but thank you for helping me believe in my shop again. I left the cafe on a light, rainy afternoon. Standing beneath the awning, I found myself smiling. It was a familiar feeling, just like when I was younger. Finishing my first campaign and having a client pull me into a grateful hug, I knew this was not a grand comeback, but part of me had come alive again. Time went on. I accepted a few more small projects, all from brands that had been hurt by the pandemic or left behind by their parent companies. I did not charge much, sometimes only a symbolic fee, but I watched. I listened, and piece by piece, I rebuilt myself with each new plan. I returned to the core principles of emotional marketing, but this time without chasing big budgets or viral trends. I focused only on what was real, what reached real people. One morning, as I was editing a slide deck for an independent bookstore, I received an email from someone I used to know in the industry. It was Laura, once the PR director at Veritas, now working for a luxury fashion brand. "Are you still freelancing?" she wrote. "We're looking for a strategy consultant for a human-focused launch campaign. Could we meet and talk?" I stared at the screen for a while. It was the first time in nearly a year that I saw the phrase strategy consultant associated with my name, and not in a termination email. I accepted. The meeting was set at a cafe near the park where I often went to read. Laura arrived on time, her gaze uncertain as she looked at me. "You look different from how you were at the company." I smiled gently, maybe because I no longer lived to prove anything to anyone. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Laura shared that her company wanted to rebuild its brand with a focus on real values and empathy. She said none of the consultants they had met had impressed the leadership team. "They know how to talk," she said, "but none of them know how to listen. I remembered you because you were the only one who ever taught me that listening is the foundation of every lasting relationship." When I walked out of the cafe, I had not accepted the offer yet, but I already knew my answer. That was the moment I realized I was ready to step out of the shadows, not to take revenge, but to prove that when all the layers are stripped away, what remains is the core. And if that core is strong enough, it will lead you back into the light, this time with a steadier pace, a new approach, and a calmness I had not realized I had been carrying all along. Some things do not require retaliation, because time will handle them in its own way. But I did not rely on time. I chose to act, quietly, methodically, without spectacle. After meeting with Laura, I accepted the role of strategy advisor for their rebranding campaign. From the way they described it, I could already sense echoes of what I once tried to build at Veritas, but was never acknowledged for. I stayed behind the scenes. I declined to have my name attached to any public documents, but I was there for every brainstorming session, every consumer insight survey, every late-night call to adjust campaign details. I still kept my old habits. I took notes obsessively, listened intently to every piece of feedback, and analyzed every subtle behavior of the audience. The only difference this time was that no one was waiting to take credit. No one built a pitch deck from my work only to push me out. The people around me respected me, not because of where I had been, but because of what I brought to the table. The campaign launched after 3 months of preparation. The old brand, once dismissed as superficial and out of touch, emerged with a completely different face. They told user stories without sugarcoating, without control. They offered imperfect but relatable products. They dared to speak openly about past failures and what they had learned from them. And then, something rare happened. Audiences began sharing the content voluntarily, videos rooted in emotion, real stories. They spread naturally, with no budget for ads. When the campaign hit 1 million views in just 5 days, I received an email from a familiar name. It was Fiona, once the creative team lead at Veritas, now a director of strategy. The subject line said only one word, "You," and the message itself was simpler than I expected. "We all know you were behind that campaign. And just so you know, during this morning's board meeting, our old boss walked out of the room halfway through. Thank you for reminding everyone what it means to create something that truly resonates. I read the email in silence, not for vindication, but as a reminder. Some things do not require confrontation. You just have to do your part well, and the truth will find its own path. But I also knew the ripple effect was far from over, and I was right. A week later, Veritas held a press event for a new campaign titled Reclaim Your Voice. They introduced it as an initiative to honor consumers by giving them space to tell their own stories. The concept sounded familiar, too familiar. When I watched their teaser video, I froze. The visuals, the camera angles, even the opening narration, all were slightly altered versions of a concept I had submitted in their internal system a year ago, a concept that had been rejected, labeled too emotional, not viral enough. I opened my laptop, pulled up the original file, the submission date, the recipient, their written response. Everything was still there. I took screenshots and sent them to Laura. I was not demanding credit. I just wanted to make sure this would not continue. The next day, Laura's company sent Veritas a formal warning. If they continued to use the content without proper attribution or permission, legal action would follow. Veritas made no comment, but within days, they pulled all teaser content and replaced it with a watered-down version, less compelling, less cohesive. I said nothing. I posted nothing, but those who knew understood. And soon, the story began to spread. A LinkedIn post about large agencies exploiting the work of former employees was shared thousands of times. The post did not name names, but the details were unmistakable. The discussion grew. People began recounting their own experiences with stolen credit, some anonymously, others openly. Veritas came under pressure. They had no way to deny it, no way to explain, because the evidence came from those who had once worked there. Meanwhile, the brand I was advising continued to grow, without massive investments, without hype, just through real, emotional storytelling that connected with actual people. Smaller agencies began reaching out to me, asking for guidance on building business models rooted in real value rather than polished theatrics. One night, while adjusting slides for a workshop titled Marketing with Integrity, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. The voice on the other end made me go still. It was Ethan, the former executive director of Veritas, the one who had signed my termination letter. His voice was calm, but there was something unsteady beneath it. "I think we need to talk," he said. I paused for a few seconds, then answered, "I have nothing left to say, and I believe you have nothing left to explain." He exhaled quietly. "It's not an apology, if that's what you think, but I admit, things are slipping out of control. We have lost several key clients. Some core staff are planning to leave. I won't deny there were mistakes, but I thought maybe you'd want to be part of the change to help ensure what happened to you doesn't happen again." I listened carefully, then responded, "Thank you for calling, but I have chosen a different path. I am walking it now, and I have no intention of going back to fix what others deliberately broke. I am not seeking revenge through scandal. I am simply doing what is right. And if that makes things difficult for you, the fault is not mine." I ended the call after that. No shouting, no argument. Just one final conversation to close an old chapter. I knew then that the time to stand fully had arrived. No more small freelance gigs, no more anonymous blog posts. I was ready to step forward with a new role, a new presence, and a title they once refused to give me, a builder of true value through emotional marketing. There was a morning when I opened my eyes and knew I was no longer the person I used to be. Not because of any particular message, not because of a sudden event, just a quiet shift from within. After everything that had happened, I no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone, but I also knew it was time to step into the light with my name, my face, and the path that truly belonged to me. Laura was the first to notice. During a strategy session for a young startup trying to overhaul its entire media approach, She paused and looked at me, then chuckled. "You're not hiding anymore, are you?" I didn't respond directly, just took a sip from a cup of coffee that had gone cold, but my eyes told her everything. I was ready. My first decision wasn't tied to a campaign or a brand. It was a piece of writing. I reopened my personal blog, which until then had only housed short notes and project scraps, and posted a long-form article titled "Working Without Losing Yourself." I named no names. I made no accusations. It was simply an honest reflection on the journey I had walked, the mistakes I had made, what I had learned from being pushed out of my former company, and how small, sincere projects helped me rebuild my faith in the profession. The post spread faster than I had imagined. People who had once stayed silent about what happened to me now spoke up. Some wrote that they had seen what happened at Veritas but didn't have the courage to intervene. Others were newcomers to the industry and said the post opened their eyes to a side of the job beyond its glossy surface. But the most surprising message came from an independent publisher. They asked if I would consider writing a book. I turned them down the first time, not because I was afraid of writing, but because I feared misplacing the intention. I did not want to turn my story into a tool for sympathy or a shortcut to popularity. But after a long conversation with their lead editor, I reconsidered. She didn't want a memoir. She wanted a collection of real, professional lessons seen through the lens of someone who had been betrayed, but chose not to retaliate with rage. She used a phrase that stayed with me: revenge through growth. For the next 4 months, I split time between branding projects and writing. I woke early every morning to draft fragments of thought, and before bed, I reviewed and rewrote passages that still felt hollow. The book did not speak about those who had hurt me. It spoke about an industry lost between comfort and pressure, and how one could still preserve what is real. I called it emotional marketing, practicing like a real human. When the manuscript was done, I sent it to one person first, Thomas. He replied 2 days later with one sentence: "I don't think this book is just for creatives. It's for anyone who has ever lost faith in themselves." I used that line as the book's dedication. On launch day, I held no press conference, just a small conversation at a quiet book cafe. Seats were limited, but sold out in 3 days. During the talk, someone asked, "Have you ever wanted to go back to the company just to prove they were wrong?" I paused for a moment, then shook my head. I don't think I need to go back to prove anything. They've seen it already, even if they refuse to admit it. A month later, I was invited to guest lecture for a short course on building ethical brands. I agreed, on one condition. The class had to include both students and professionals, because I believed emotional marketing isn't bound by age or experience, but by the courage to face what we fear at work: fear of being forgotten, fear of being dismissed, fear of having nothing left to say. One day after class, as I was packing up my materials, an older participant approached me. He introduced himself as Ethan. The face made me pause. Familiar. Still the same eyes, but no longer proud, just tired. "I'm here to learn again," he said slowly. "Not because I want to fix things, but because I've lost too much before realizing where I went wrong." I nodded. No handshake, no small talk, no mention of the past. Just a quiet nod, like a final full stop for a chapter that had long been closed. I didn't need Ethan to change. I just needed to know that I had, and that the path ahead no longer required anyone's approval. That night, I stood by the window, watching city lights flicker in the distance. I thought of everything that had happened, the fall I thought I wouldn't recover from, the trembling hands writing my first lines after the collapse, the pain of being erased, diminished, discarded like a spare part in a machine that once called me irreplaceable. Then I thought of the present, of packed workshops, of partnership calls from small companies rebuilding on trust, of brave young professionals writing to say they chose this path because they believed it was possible to succeed with kindness. I never called this journey revenge, but if I had to name it, perhaps it would be this: a quiet comeback, one without shouting, without confrontation, just a steady rise, at the right moment, on my own 2 feet. And now, I was ready to step into the final act. There's something particular about early autumn light in Chicago. It is neither harsh, like summer, nor dull, like winter, but instead, a soft layer that rests over everything, making every detail feel clearer, more real. That morning, I left home with a different mindset. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a steady stillness. I was no longer the woman who got pushed out of her old company, no longer the shadow of who I used to be. I was Jennifer Aniston, founder of Anima Studios. And today was the day I signed my first strategic partnership for a community media initiative I had nurtured quietly for over a year. The meeting was held on the 15th floor of a glass building I'd walked into many times back when I worked as a hired consultant. But this time, I entered the room as a decision maker. Across the table sat representatives from 3 of the state's largest nonprofit organizations. They were looking to use media as a bridge to reconnect with marginalized communities, to rebuild a sense of empathy that had grown faint in public life. And they chose Anima, not only because of our capabilities, but because of my story, because I rebuilt everything from scratch, not with fury, but with quiet persistence. I presented the proposal with a calm and steady voice, as if I had never trembled in those early days of trying to rebuild a life. The plan revolved around emotional marketing, using authentic experiences from real people to craft campaigns that were not only compelling, but lasting in their impact. When I finished speaking, the room fell quiet for a few seconds. Then came the nods, the scribble of pens, the soft thud of hands tapping the table. The deal was sealed. I stood up, shook hands with each person, and felt the warmth in my palms, a warmth I once thought I had lost the day I walked out of my former company. On the way back, I received a message from a former colleague. Just one line. They're holding an emergency meeting. Investors are pulling out. I didn't feel joy, only a quiet sense of closure. What needed to be answered had already been answered. Not through confrontation, but through results. In an industry where everything can be overturned by a single misstep, I chose to rebuild from the foundation. I chose kindness. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a major conference on creative entrepreneurship. The theme was, "When you've lost everything, what do you still have to start over?" I stood on the stage, lights casting down on my face, listening to my heartbeat. I told my story without embellishment, not as a triumphant return, but as someone who had walked a long path and still held faith in doing the right thing. I spoke of lost trust, of relationships once believed to be unshakable, and of what I had relearned from scratch. I spoke of the people who stayed when I had nothing left, of Thomas, who was the first to reach out with a new offer, of the former intern who was now my co-founder, of myself, carrying boxes out of my old office with trembling hands but steady eyes. After the talk, a woman in her 60s reached out and gently held my hand. "Thank you," she said. "I was betrayed once, too, but today, I think I can begin again." I squeezed her hand in return. No more words were needed. The night Anima was honored at a Media for Good awards ceremony. I walked onto the stage in a simple slate blue dress, holding a clear glass trophy in my hands. The camera flashes sparkled. Toward the back of the room, I caught a glimpse of familiar faces from my past. Emma was there. Our eyes met. There was no resentment, no pride, just a quiet nod. The kind of gesture that puts a final period on a long sentence. Emma was now struggling in another agency. The old company was selling off pieces to survive growing debt. Reports said they had lost nearly all major clients after a string of internal scandals. But I didn't mention any of that in my speech. I said just one line. I didn't come here to win. I came here not to fall. That night, I sat alone in the office, looking out over the city skyline. The lights in the distance glimmered like anchors. A year ago, I didn't think I would rise again. Now, not only was I standing, I was helping others to rise with me. It didn't come from luck. It came from choosing, day by day, to stay clear, stay kind, and stay steady. Revenge by success was never my goal. It became the natural result of holding firm to something real. A new email arrived. It was an invitation from an international media organization, wanting to replicate the model Anima had created. I opened it, read through each line, and smiled. Then I turned off the light, packed up my bag, and walked out. No applause, no spotlight. Sometimes, a comeback doesn't need fanfare. It's just the quiet certainty of walking your own path, while those who once pushed you aside are left standing at the edge, watching,